Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just wrapped up talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers defeating the Orlando Magic in Game 7, pulling off that comeback. But now we are going to be moving on to the Western Conference, where we had a couple big games from the weekend. We're going to be starting with the Los Angeles Clippers falling to the Dallas Mavericks in their Game 6 matchup and officially being eliminated from the postseason, which sort of leads to all different types of questions surrounding this team. I guess we'll just sort of start on the Mavericks side of this briefly, because it was really encouraging to see for the Mavericks the way that this relationship between Luka and Kyrie has just continued to develop, and the fact that it seems like Kyrie has sort of put the doubts surrounding his level of buy-in and his level of maturity in terms of being regularly available for a team, sort of put that to rest. And listen, I know it's super easy to go and play revisionist history. He was a distraction, at least of sorts, when he was in Brooklyn, and it didn't seem like, even when you go back to Boston a little bit as well, there was just sort of I don't want to call it selfishness, but that is kind of what it was. And it was just sort of something that was really frustrating, because Kyrie Irving, the basketball player, is just so fun to watch. And now it feels like he is on this other side of his sort of need to be a little bit of the center of attention and to have things circulate around him. And he plays with a player in Luka who they kind of share a lot of similarities in their game, but they do so in such a complementary way of one another. And we see Kyrie, I mean, I think one of the biggest things, he's clearly, when he's speaking in these interviews, he's making a point of it himself, which is fair, but how much more he cares about the defensive end nowadays, understanding that there is another player on his team that can really do it all offensively. And we've seen him, just the hustle plays that he made over the course of this series was tremendous. I bring this all up because in the second half of this game, where Kyrie was a little bit quieter in the first half because he is sort of okay with deferring to Luka a little bit more. And I say that, I feel like a lot of the times when you get in basketball media, this idea of deferring is such a, has a negative connotation, but I think it's unselfish. It plays into a team game, and when you have a teammate like Luka Doncic, it is absolutely fair to do so. But in this game, Luka yet again really struggled from the field. He was 9 of 26. The three-point shooting for him has just been brutal in this first round series. So he ends up averaging 30 points per game in the series. So it's hard to necessarily criticize Luka, but his three-point shooting percentage was just under 24% on 11 attempts per game. And it is really hurting him, and you can argue the team as well, even though especially down the stretch of that series, the Mavericks were sort of cruising. But, Kyrie saw that the shot wasn't necessarily there for Luka. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation about how healthy is that knee that he has been dealing with the injury, and Kyrie just sort of took things into his own hands, had LeBron tweeting about him. Definitely LeBron maybe trying to play a little bit of this recruiter for the offseason ahead, but Mavericks end up winning this one 114-101, and it was in large part due to Kyrie's 30-point performance. So we are going to be talking more on the Mavericks as the series goes on, sort of a big underlying storyline that doesn't necessarily receive the national media attention, but the fact that Maxi Kleber went down with an injury early in this game and could be out for the remainder of the playoffs. It was a separated shoulder. He's being listed out indefinitely, but Kleber was such a huge part of the Mavericks. Now, I will say, I think to some degree, Kleber was a really impactful player for that matchup in particular, where they could run the double big lineups and the Clippers couldn't necessarily hurt them from a spacing perspective because of the Russell Westbrook minutes, who, Russ, I touched on it before. I don't want to get too much into it again, but it's just gone in such a sad direction for Westbrook. Only plays 9 minutes in this game. They basically went with a 6-man rotation for the most part. The only player in double-digit minutes off of the bench in this game for the Clippers was Norman Powell. You knew the Clippers were desperate anyways as soon as you saw PJ Tucker in that starting lineup, but that's sort of besides the point. But Maxi Kleber was very impactful for them, the ability to space out and just provide some different looks. What I talked about before with the Mavericks that I really like is the variety of different lineups they can throw out there. Their bigs, they have a rotation of different guys. You can run Kleber at the 5, but in this series they were putting him a lot at the 4 alongside Gafford or Lively, who would, play those real traditional center minutes. So I liked that, along with the flexibility they have at the 3 position as well. But this could definitely be a big loss, playing an OKC team that can absolutely put up points. And again, I don't want to dive too much into that series just yet. We have the preview coming up later on this show, but that is something to definitely take into consideration when you look at whether or not the Mavericks are going to be able to, roll out the same exact team, because it doesn't seem like that is going to be the case. They're already dealing with the Tim Hardaway Jr. injury as well. So definitely a great feeling for the Mavericks. Definitely not counting them out, but at the same time, some injuries building up for them in an unfortunate way. But they are able to take down the Clippers in this series, and now the Clippers head into this offseason with tons of questions. It really makes you look back on that contract extension that they decided to hand out to Kawhi Leonard over during the middle of the season, because Kawhi was playing a tremendous year, but just time after time again, and it's unfortunate because Kawhi has been one of my favorite players to watch throughout the course of me watching basketball games. But you go and you look at the way that he has been able to be available on the court, and it just has not been there. Where the fact you look at, he has played in just 8 games in the past, I don't know, I'm trying to do math off the top of my head, but since the start of the 2021 playoffs, he missed 4 out of 4. He played the first 4 games against Utah, missed the final 2, and then the entire game 7 game series against the Suns. He played the first 2 against the Suns last year, then missed the final 3. And now he plays in just 2 of 5, was clearly compromised when he was on the court for the Mavericks as well. So this is just a situation for LA where, they're moving into this new arena, which is, from a business perspective, a big deal. And it leads to the fact that they feel like they need to invest into this star talent. They are the little brother of LA, so they're trying to, make a name for themselves, but they're doing so with an undeniable Hall of Fame talent in Kawhi Leonard, but just his availability has been abysmal for them the past handful of years, and now they enter an offseason where James Harden is a massive question, what you want to do with him, because he was another player that when it seemed like they had all of these different options and that they had depth, it was one of those conversations, well, yeah, with Harden in the postseason, you know that you're not going to get an elite level of play on a nightly basis, but if he's your third option, you can sort of get away with it. And then very quickly, he was catapulted up to being the second option, having the ball in his hands that much more. And ultimately, his stats weren't terrible, 21 points per game, 45-38 shooting splits. But down the stretch of this series as well, he was just sort of unable to. And when, all of that pressure was on him, Kawhi was ruled out. The Clippers had, they were up against the wall. He just wasn't able to pull them out of it. And that wasn't what the expectation of trading for a, however old he is now, 34-year-old James Harden. It wasn't the idea that he was going to have to be the number one option, but we also got a very inconsistent Paul George. playoff series. Now we're going to have to see how this sort of plays out in terms of whether or not the Clippers are going to want to pay him, and sort of try and run this back again. I still feel like in a world without injuries, if you are playing NBA 2K and you turn off injuries, the Clippers are a championship caliber roster for sure. But I still think things would have been very difficult for them as the playoffs went on. If they were to have to play the Nuggets, I just don't really see a world where they were ever overcoming that. We see what the Timberwolves are doing in the playoffs, and the way that the Timberwolves sort of were a bad matchup for the Clippers during the regular season anyways. Again, we know how little the regular season actually means in terms of postseason results in the NBA, but it's just a very interesting conversation. You have all of these players who have massive red flags surrounding them in James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and, if you want to get into the bench as well, Russell Westbrook, PJ Tucker. Like, on paper, it looks like they have depth, and the fact that they had to shrink down their rotation so much was something that was almost a little bit concerning. I like Amir Coffey, the fact that they didn't, but he also doesn't provide that much offensively, so I can't understand it. But I like Coffey too, so the fact that they only decided to roll him out for 8 or so minutes in this game was not, didn't love it. There's an interesting Ty Lue conversation as well. I feel like if you're the Clippers, you want to bring him back. But at the same time, the Lakers are sort of knocking on the door, trying to get Ty Lue to switch over to the other side of LA. And the Clippers are going to need to make a change. But at the same time, are they going to actually make that change in their first year in LA, where they are going to try and make this whole investment into getting their own arena and building themselves up as a brand that sort of stands out in comparison to the Lakers as well? Still just a massive question, and going to be really interesting to see how they decide to play this all out. I'm not really sure what other options they have is the reality, other than, they traded off some of the bench pieces in order to get James Harden. So I don't think they gave up any real pieces, at least, but probably let him walk. I don't think that anybody really, somebody is going to pay James Harden is the reality of the situation. I don't know if a team that is a true championship hopeful is going to have the money or is going to want to spend the money on James Harden, and he absolutely wants a contract for himself. So I guess we will see how this all plays out. But let me know in the comment section what you guys think the Clippers should do in this offseason. We are going to be taking our second break now, and when we come back on the other end, I want to dive into the Timberwolves taking Game 1 from the Nuggets in Denver and the continued ascension of Anthony Edwards. So we are going to be taking a quick break. We will be right back. Stick with us.